a piece. We are live streaming today, which is sort of a new thing for us. So if you have any sort of comments or anything, as opposed to talking to us in person, you can go ahead and type them in the comments. And we have Caitlin behind the camera who can read them to us. First of all, what we want to do is sort of go through the equipment for anybody who's never seen a demonstration with us before. So we got Misha down there with our lovely furnace. This sits at about 2150. Inside that nice glowing door is a big ceramic crucible or a bowl. And that bowl holds about 500 pounds of molten glass. So we can throw that glass in cold, bring it all the way back up to temp, and then we can start working with it at that molten temperature. Next we have our pipe warmer. Misha's gonna grab one of our pipes for us. Hot glass only sticks to hot things. So all of our pipes are made out of stainless steel. You notice Misha's not wearing gloves. He needs to have a lot of dexterity to be able to turn that pipe. So we put those in our pipe warmer, so it's got that nice cherry red glow on it. When Misha goes to take a gather, it's sort of like taking a chopstick and sticking it in honey, right? The glass isn't the solid state that you're used to. Misha's got to physically wind it up onto the pipe. So we give it a nice preheat. That's going to help Misha out later on. Misha's using a blow pipe right now, so you see him connecting that thing. It's called a blow hose. It's sort of our amendment to the COVID thing. Misha's got that nice noodle to hook up to the bottom. So Misha's going to give his pipe a good preheat. Misha's going to be making what we call a collar. So it's just a little bit of glass. We're going to pick up a chunk of color bar here in a minute, and we'll still go ahead and talk about that when we get there. But he's got that nice fresh gather. It's glowing that bright orange. And all of our tank is colorless. So it's got nice clear glass. The reason Misha's making a collar is because this is sort of a public access studio, right? We have anywhere between 20 to 30 different artists working in here. And if we were to have only one color of glass in the furnace, it would really limit our palette of things that we're able to create. So Misha can make his nice collar. Sort of like a little sock. And he's going to make that nice and flat. Hot glass sticks to hot things, right? So when we're picking up color bar, it's a little bit different. We have to preheat that color. And while Misha's getting ready really quick, I can show you guys the big color bar. So this is what it looks like when we have it nice and cold. This glass is too thick, so if Misha were to just try to pick this up right in like the room temperature air, it's going to crack and break. So we're going to go over to our nice pickup oven. And this is up to annealing temperature, which is 918 degrees for this glass. It's sort of like room temperature for the glass. We call it annealing temperature because that's the temperature that it's stable at. So it's sort of somewhere in between cold room temperature glass and the ooey gooey molten stuff. So Misha's going to heat that up back up to working temperature. And the color bar is nice, like I said, because we mostly have clear glass in here, right? And glass color doesn't really work like paint color. We can't add pigment to the glass and tint it. What we're working with in here is all chemical. So if we wanted to make blue glass, everything's done with metal oxide. So blue is a mix between copper or cobalt, and we would have to throw that cobalt into our furnace, and we would be exclusively working with blue glass. So in order to widen our range, we have the nice color list. If we were to be like Fenton, if they're working and they're making something that's one color, they would drain all the glass out of their furnace, put in one color, use up all of that color, put in a new color. But that can sort of take a really long time. So we're not blowing glass in the quantities of a factory, right? We're making objects less frequently, so it takes us a lot more time to drain out our furnace. And it's just got that nice and melted. So there's a lot of different colors that create a lot of different things. For us to be able to work with such a limited color palette, you have to get a little bit creative. So Misha's actually going to be working with two different types of glass. She's got that nice color bar base, and then we're going to put some frit on top. Misha's going to put green frit on top, but we have this nice rainbow so you guys can take a look. Frit is sort of the glass that you see when we do workshops. We don't have to preheat the frit, so it's a little bit easier. Just because those pieces are so small, When Misha sticks his nice hot gather in there, it'll just soak those up really quickly. So things come in bar and they come in frit, right? And there's a couple different factories around the world that can make this glass for us. And we're working with soft glass or soda lime glass. And we can talk about the chemistry of that a little bit later when we have time, but this is a little bit different from your Pyrex or things like that. So Misha's gonna let this set up. He's gotten it nice and smooth because if we ever have any indentations in the glass while it's hot, when we go to gather on top of it, it can really easily trap a big giant air bubble. And I know Misha's not a fan of bubbles. We can put bubbles in on purpose to add sort of a decorative element, but accidental bubbles are a no-go. Misha's got himself a nice little gather. We haven't actually put any air into this yet because Misha's gonna do a little bit of manipulating once we've got the frit on. Frit's really nice because since it has those tiny, tiny specks, and you'll notice as Misha starts to manipulate it, we can use it almost like paint to give sort of a linear stretched approach, sort of a painterly option. Whereas if we were to use something with color bar, we have these big bottles in our collection when you come into the gallery. They look like they're one color all the way through. This gives it a little bit of depth and dimension. And frit comes in all different sizes. We're working with like a medium-sized frit. We could get it in much larger chunks, and those would add nice big spots. We can go all the way down to glass powder, which is sort of the consistency of flour. And since it's so fine, you can even push it and make patterns, and then we could roll those patterns up onto our bubble. It can get really, really intricate really quickly. So now Misha's just got that frit on there. You notice he doesn't have to preheat the frit. It sticks right to that bubble. He's gonna melt it in a little bit so it goes from that sharp state when he rolls it up. He'll melt it in and smooth it out. So we're working with soda lime glass, right? That sort of means that there's three major components. There's silica, which is the basis of all glass and basically all rock type matter. That's your sand, so that's really the basis of our pot. If we were to melt just raw silica though, we'd have to get much, much hotter. So in soda lime glass, there's soda ash, and that soda ash acts as a flux. And if you've ever worked with metal, you know that flux allows you to melt things at a much selection, and it has that sort of rainbow sheen. That glass is slowly being broken down by water. So if we were to stick that glass in a bucket of water, eventually over time it's gonna break down. He's just going into one of our optic molds. He's got the small one. I'll show you guys the big one. He's got those nice ridges. And we use these for a lot of different things. So this is our big one. This is something that we would use to make pumpkins, right? Because it's got those nice deep ridges. But these can allow us to really take advantage of some of the properties of glass in order to change up the shape. He's just giving it a good twisty twist. This is gonna physically pull that frit around. Put it into nice lines. Beautiful. So now Misha's gonna melt that up a little bit. We're gonna smooth it out, and now we can start to put our bubble in. But our optic molds work because we like to say that glass has a memory, right? Every time Misha touches it with a tool, it's gonna remember that heat. And heat's the name of the game in here. As soon as Misha's coming out of the furnace, that glass is already losing heat. So he wants to make sure he's always at a working temperature. When you first start blowing glass, you like come out here and you wait too long and then it sets up a lot. And then you gotta go back to the reheating chamber and heat it back up. And that just takes way more time than just keeping it warm enough to keep it malleable. The other thing about glass color is you can see it's sort of glowing that bright orange. That's that metal oxide that's in there. So we're working with green, so there's probably a lot of iron in there. Everything at 2,000 degrees is gonna glow bright orange. As we start to inflate it though and let it set up a little bit, some of that green color will come out. And Misha's put a nice white on the bottom. So this is a good opportunity for us to sort of talk about layering, right? One of the unique properties of glass is its transparency. So transparent colors are colors that you can see through, The window glass that you look through every day is all transparent. It has that slight tint, that slight greeny tint. That just comes from the iron content in the silica that they use to make those windows. So those are transparent. Opaque glass is something like if you have a wall barrier up and you can't see through it and it's made out of glass, that's opaque. So Misha's taken an opaque color underneath. We put a layer of clear glass through it just because the metals in the green and the metals in the white can react, and then usually they turn brown, which isn't something anybody's looking for. And then Misha has the nice transparent green on top. I don't think this is a mix. I think this is just maybe like dark green or pine tree or something. So you'll be able to see through that green. And the nice thing about a technique like this, especially with frit, is that there's different layers of thickness. So different layers of thickness of colored glass are going to look like different tones within the color. Misha's giving a little air. Misha's got enough glass to maybe make like a nice cup, a small bowl, but if I know him, we want to get a little bit bigger. So we're going to take one more gather on top of this. And Misha's got to let this set up a little bit, right? Especially with that bubble in there. If Misha's walls are really thin and he goes to gather on top of this, that bubble is going to condense back down. And when you first start working with the material, it can be really scary to work with color because if Misha drops any of that color back into the furnace, it's going to tint the entire furnace that color. And then we're all making green stuff for like 3 to 5 years and no one is happy. So we'll let that set up nice. Yeah, I'm going to give this a rake. This is just to sort of pop any bubbles that are on top of the surface of the glass in the furnace. He's just going to take one more dip on top. Sorry. And he's going to take something called a strip gather. So it can be a little bit challenging for us to sort of control how much material we're getting out of the furnace, right? Because we're thinking chopstick into honey. So every time Misha takes a gather, he basically doubles his volume in material. So, since that core is nice and cold, that hot outer layer can fall right off with gravity and just gets pulled right off the pipe. Now Misha can start to really inflate. And when we're working in here, one of the most challenging parts is the fact that we can't touch the material, right? We can't feel how a cup feels on our hand or on the table. We can't put fruit in a bowl until it's cold. So Misha's going to do a little bit of preparation in order to make sure our object's going to be nice and sturdy. This sort of comes with an experience. So the first couple cups you make when you're blowing glass, they're really thin at the bottom and really thick at the top. So Misha's going to do something we call bottom weighting. He's going to use our Marver table. I think he's going to go to the big one if I have to take a guess. Oh, we're going to block it. Oh, these are our lovely wooden block tools. I forgot to mention them. Most of the tools that you'll see were made out of stainless steel. Stainless steel is a really poor conductor of heat. So Misha can put those tools in his hands and they'll last a long time before they start to burn you a little bit. But our wooden blocks are made out of a fruit wood. I think these are cherry. So they're a really tight grained wood, which means that they have a really low sap content. So we keep them nice and waterlogged. If we were used to something like oak, those are going to catch on fire really quickly. But we can use our nice waterlogged blocks. And what actually happens is it creates a steam barrier. So the block and the wood isn't actually doing any of the shaping. That steam barrier is called the Leidenfrost effect. And it's that same effect when you have a hot pan and you throw a little bit of water in there and it does that dancey thing. That's our Leidenfrost effect, and we can use that to our advantage. Misha's further pushing the bottom weighting. He's going over to our marvering table. And when we talk about our bubble, we talk about it like a body, right? That part that's closest to the pipe is our neck. So at the very top is our neck. Then we have our shoulder. Misha's expanding our shoulder right now. And this is the part that's eventually going to be the top of our bowl. We just have to do a little bit of prep work ahead of time. When Misha's blowing, he's not blowing crazy hard. But as he's blowing, that air wants to go where the glass is the hottest. And the bottom of that bowl is the first thing that goes in the reheating chamber and the last thing that comes out. So as you can imagine, it gets really, really hot. So we got to sort of use our marvering table. We're using that principle of glass having a memory. So even though Misha's just done that marvering move, that glass is going to remember that heat change for the rest of the object. Misha's going to put in our jack line. This is another one of our basic principles of glass blowing, right? And this is sort of our iconic tool. It's our jacks. These are modeled after a pair of shears. So nothing in the museum has a pipe stuck to the end of it, right? We have to figure out how to get this off of the pipe. So when the Romans first started blowing glass, the tool is the exact same. We're using it sort of like a pair of scissors to physically cut in that line. But Misha sort of is working in the round, right? If he were to just squeeze really hard in one spot, it's going to create one little V. So he starts off gentle when that glass is really gooey, slowly constricts that line down, and then once it's tight enough, we can use a little bit of vibration to physically knock that bowl off. You can start to see that green a little bit as we sort of start to inflate and stretch. It'll change even more and more. When we're looking for heat, we can look for a couple different things. Color is a good indication, so we know the glass's temperature based on how high it's glowing. But we can also sort of tell by our movement, right? Green is a really soft color, so Misha's using our nice paper tool. This is 8 to 10 sheets of newspaper, just fold it up. This is the closest we ever get to physically touching the material, right? Misha can't take his hand and feel the side of the bowl while we're working on it. So he's got that nice paper that's waterlogged just like our blocks and uses that same steam barrier while also allowing him to physically feel the profile of the object. You ready? So we're going to put a foot on the bottom of this. And remember, it's like a body. The foot is the part that contacts the ground. This left one's, right one is plenty?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to get Misha a double dip. I'm going to hijack your diamond shears really quick. And one of the nice things about hot glass is that it fuses to other hot glass really well. So we don't have to do any sort of prep work on Misha's bubble. He just wants to make sure it's nice and set up so that way when we stick the hot glass on, it doesn't alter the shape. I'm going to take one dip as my core, let that set up a little bit. I physically could try to gather up enough glass for this, but my arms are going to have to work really hard. And this can be really challenging on your body. So I like to make it easy when I can. Okay, I'm going to go back in for my next dip. You want a cookie, right? Okay. And we call this a cookie foot because it's basically like a cookie of glass, right? So I can go straight up and down. The glass is going to pool off on its own. I can just cut it right through. And then Misha's going to come over and attach his bubble onto the glass. And remember, he doesn't have to do any prep work. Hot glass sticks to hot glass really, really well. He's going to give it a little drag, make sure it's nice and on center. And since his bubble is nice and set up, he's really using that furnace heat to his advantage. So we can really start to heat that little cookie up and then give it a nice shape. When we drop that hot, hot glass onto a marver, that marver is cold stainless steel, so there's enough of a thermal shock for it to create something called heat chill. That's that texture that's on that bottom. So Misha's going to go in with this paper, and he's physically shaping this foot up with his fingers. He's got his thumb in the bottom. That allows him to create a little bit of a shape, and then he can use his side fingers. He's got his nice blow hose. This is sort of a quick move you have to do. Just because if Misha lets that heat sink into that bubble before he's done shaping his foot, he's gonna run out of time. So we'll go in with this jacks. I'm gonna go in with this wooden paddle. It's made out of that same cherry wood. And this is gonna allow us to shape it nice and flat. So that way we can make sure it makes good contact with the table. Misha's giving it a little indent. That's so that it makes that really nice contact with the table. If you ever take like a soda bottle or a wine bottle and flip it upside down, you'll notice it has that really deep indent. That's so that we can sort of control the material and how it's contacting. Since cold glass is so fragile, you have to be really, really careful with how you're working with it to make sure that it has enough strength to withhold being used. And when we make stuff in here, usually it's sort of functional ware, right? This is going to be a bowl. This is going to be something people can put fruit in or anything like that. There's tons of other different artistic ways of working with the material. So like some of the objects you see in our collection are going to be a little bit more fragile. And glass, even at its thinnest point, can still withstand a lot more pressure than you would think. We're going to let this foot set up a little bit. Punty? Okay, Misha's going to give you guys a quick flash. So if we were to break this off right now, right, there's only one option for the opening. It's going to be that sharp top. And we could go in, we could cut it off. But if I knew Misha, he wants a little bit more control on how this bowl opens up. So I'm going to make him something called a punty. And punty is Italian for point or bridge. And it's just a tiny little connection on the bottom of our bowl that's going to allow us to flip it around and work on the top. This is where I get really quiet, because if I bring Misha the wrong shaped punty, this object can really easily fuse onto the bottom of our bowl, or it can cause it to fall off and break later on. We want a nice little Q-tip. I'm going to cool this pipe off just so Misha can grab it nice and high. I didn't mention our pipe cooler before. We have this nice cooler because we want to make sure our hands can stay as far apart as possible. We're sort of thinking about this like working a hockey stick. Misha's just going to go ahead and stick me on the bottom. And he's going to turn and make sure we're nice and on center. When we're working in here, it's sort of like ceramics in that at the beginning of throwing a pot, you sort of have to center the clay a little bit. But in here, Misha's got to center the entire time. I'm ready. Misha's going to use a little bit of water. Going to give it a good tap. And we're going to take it for a quick flash. So that glass was just cold enough for break. So this is sort of when it's at a sensitive time. Misha's going to make sure that's nice and on center. He's got a nice little baby paddle. And here as we start to open it, you'll really be able to see that white on the inside that we put on earlier. Misha's got sort of a cool fade going. It can be hard to tell if something's truly faded though until it's nice and cool. Sometimes that heat disparity sort of tricks your eye a little bit. But now we're going to work on opening this up. So this glass was just cold enough for us to break it, right? So it's probably way below 2000s, and Misha has to take it all the way back up to 2100. So this is our longest reheat. And you'll notice Misha's up and down a lot, right? Glass blowing is not something for people who like want to take a patient long time, do things really delicately. It's up and down and up and down. This is a good time where we normally take questions. If anybody wants to ask Caitlin anything, she can read it back to me. There we go. Misha's got some nice heat. I'm going to use our wood paddle again. And we're sort of creating a mold. So the mold between Misha's jacks and the mold between the paddle is going to allow us to make that lip nice and flat. Remember, it's all about the body. We're all the way back to the lip. Misha's going to use our Sophietta. And this is a special tool because we're off of the blowpipe, right? We can't change the shape of the bubble. But when they invented the Sophietta, it made it so that they could thin out their cups a lot. So they would blow really, really hard into the top of the bowl, and that would allow them to make their lips much, much thinner. We get to do a little bit of cheating. He's just going to give it a quick paper just to keep it nice and straight. And then he can go in with his Sophietta and give it a good puff. You can see it starts to inflate a little bit. That's one of those times with the glass that you have to blow sort of hard. So if you're Sophieing a really large object, you got to really go for it. And then you can get a little lightheaded. It's good to have an assistant Sophietta for you. So now we're going to start working on opening this up. So Misha's just heating that front. One of the hardest part of working with bowls is that they're a really shallow object, right? So that punty can get really, really hot really quickly. So Misha might come back out, let that punty cool down a little bit, and then go back into heating that lip. Start to open that up a little bit. And then he can take his paper and shrink down those sides, so that way they're nice and smooth. This is a really nice time for the paper because this is a time where you can really feel that profile of the bowl. So if there's ever any kinks in it, you can smooth those out and know that they're gone. When we're looking at the glass, we're always looking at it turning, right? So it can be sort of hard to identify problem areas. If you ever stop turning for a second or rest on too long for a tool with one side, it's going to cause some unevenness in your bubble, and it can be really challenging to recover from. Misha's going to give it a good spin, and you notice he's really focusing on his turning. Misha's using something called centrifugal force. So when you work a centrifuge, it spins, right? And it separates all of those elements. Misha's controlling his spinning in order to open his bowl up a little bit. And we could do this all the way into making a platter, right? If Misha got this whole thing hot and he spun it out, it's going to go flat, right into a plate. And that's how we would make plates if we were making plates. Misha's going to do that again. He's going to do a little bit of crisping. And it's going to make it nice and smooth. Now you can really see that white on the inside of our bowl. And Misha's just using a little chunk of white. And white is technically an opaque color, but as we blow it out and thin it out, it's going to look more and more transparent. We do have a nice blow going on. A nice fade is the word I'm looking for. And now you can sort of start to see that green show up. I always feel like glass color is much darker in the beginning, so we won't really know what the true colors are until it's completely cool. And now Misha's got that nice shape in there. Okay. Misha's going to do one more touch up. I know when we start working in here, you sort of, in the beginning, people want things that are handmade and sort of unique. But as you start blowing glass more and more, you want it to look more and more machine-made. And how glass is made in factories is how they would just have a mold, right? So sort of like our optic mold. If we were to make cups professionally and commercially, we would blow them into molds and then just cut the top off and polish it. So we could do that with bowls. We could do that with anything, really. And that's how things are typically made in factories. But in here, we got to do things by hand, make it look nice. How you can tell something's made by hand is if you look at that bottom, it's got that nice punty mark. So if you've ever like gotten a cup from a Goodwill and you see that little mark on the bottom, that's how you know somebody's hand blown it. So we're gonna get ready to start taking this thing off. So Misha's gonna do something called flashing down. And really he's just evening out the heat between all the different layers of glass. So that lip was just hot enough for us to really move it around, and that punty's sort of setting up a little bit. So Misha's gonna use our lovely map torch, and he's gonna introduce some more heat into that punty in order for us to make enough of a thermal shock to break this off the piece. And when we're breaking it off, it's really similar to how we broke it off of the blowpipe. We're gonna use a little bit of water and a little bit of vibration. I'm putting on my cool suit. I put on this nice welding jacket and a pair of Kevlar gloves. This is gonna allow me to physically pick that bowl up, and we're gonna put it away in our annealing oven. 2 more? Okay. You wanna take it off over there?
Yeah, I'll take it off.
Okay. What Misha's looking for right now is some movement from that punty. That's how we know we're nice and hot. Okay, that's cool. Misha's gonna put some water on over there. Then he's gonna walk our bowl over here. He's just using a couple drops of water, and he's going up to where the punty connects to the bottom of the bowl. And then he can give it a quick little tap, and it'll pop right off. Then he'll take our hot torch, and he's gonna melt in that punty mark. Because that glass is just cold enough to break, so it can be a little bit sharp. Misha's gonna make sure it's nice and smooth. And then he's got our brass TMA stamp. That's one of the ways you can tell that things are made here. We'll either sign it on the bottom, or we'll have that nice stamp on there. And brass is a strong enough metal that it won't get too hot being touched into the glass, and it will make a nice impression. So that goes away into our annealing oven. And in there is sitting at that 918, that's that same temperature the color bar was at. And annealing is really important because if we were to just leave it out in the room temperature glass, the air in this room is cold enough that it's gonna cause it to crack and break really quickly. So the thickest part of that glass is that bottom foot. It's about that thick, right? So that's gonna take about 24 hours to cool down. If we just left it out, it's gonna crack and break really quickly. So anytime you come in here and you make a workshop object, we gotta let it cool down overnight. And we do have some objects in the collection that are really, really thick, right? We have that large bench in the ancient gallery. That cooled down for about 11 months, and it still has tiny cracks in it. So it cooled down for about 6 more. So we'll let that cool down overnight. If anybody has any questions really quick, you can comment them for Caitlin, and she can read them out to me. Otherwise, the galleries are open. They're open Wednesday through Sunday, I believe. And the times are varying, so go ahead and look on the website. Other than that, Caitlin, anything? We'd like to thank Owens, Illinois for sponsoring our demonstrations. And other than that, we're doing these on Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday. So we'll see you guys on Friday at 2 o'clock.